Part 1. The Hearth and the Salamander. It was a pleasure to burn. It was a special pleasure to see things eaten, to see things blackened and changed. With the brass nozzle in his fists, with this great python spitting its venomous kerosene upon the world, the blood pounded in his head, and his hands were the hands of some amazing conductor playing all of the symphonies of blazing and burning to bring down the tatters and charcoal ruins of history. With his symbolic helmet numbered 451 on his stolid head, and his eyes all orange flame with the thought of what came next, he flicked the igniter, and the house jumped up in a gorging fire that burned the evening sky red and yellow and black. He strode in a swarm of fireflies. He wanted above all, like the old joke, to shove a marshmallow on a stick in the furnace, while the flapping pigeon-wing books died on the porch and lawn of the house. While the books went up in sparkling whirls and blew away on a wind turned dark with burning, Montauk grinned the fierce grin of all men singed and driven back by flame. He knew that when he returned to the firehouse, he might wink at himself, a minstrel man, burnt corked in the mirror. Later, going to sleep, he would feel the fiery smile still gripped by his face muscles in the dark. It never went away, that smile. It never ever went away, as long as he remembered. He hung up his black beetle-colored helmet and shined it. He hung his flame-proof jacket neatly. He showered luxuriously and then, whistling, hands in pockets, walked across the upper floor of the fire station and fell down the hole. At the last moment, when disaster seemed positive, he pulled his hand from his pockets and broke his fall by grasping the golden pole. He slid to a squeaking halt, the heels 1 inch from the concrete floor downstairs. He walked out of the fire station and along the midnight street towards the subway where the silent, air-propelled train slid soundlessly down its lubricated flue in the earth and let him out with a great puff of warm air into the cream-tiled escalator rising to the suburb. Whistling, he let the escalator waft him into the still night air. He walked towards the corner, thinking little at all about nothing in particular. Before he reached the corner, however, he slowed as if a wind had sprung up from nowhere, as if someone had called his name. The last few nights he had had the most uncertain feeling about the sidewalk just around the corner here, moving in the starlight towards his house. He had felt that in the moment before his making the turn, someone had been there. The air seemed charged with a special calm, as if someone had waited there quietly, and only a moment before he came simply turned to a shadow and let him through. Perhaps his nose detected a faint perfume, perhaps the skin on the backs of his hands on his face felt the temperature rise at this one spot where a person's standing might raise the immediate atmosphere 10 degrees for an instant. There was no understanding it. Each time he made the turn, he saw only the white, unused, buckling sidewalk with perhaps, on one night, something vanishing swiftly across the lawn before he could focus his eyes or speak. But now, tonight, he slowed almost to a stop. His inner mind, reaching out to turn the corner for him, had heard the faintest whisper. Breathing? Or was the atmosphere compressed merely by someone standing very quietly there, waiting? He turned the corner. The trees overhead made a great sound of letting down their dry rain. The girl stopped and looked as if she might pull back in surprise, but instead stood regarding Montauk with eyes so dark and shining and alive that he felt he had said something quite wonderful. But he knew his mouth had only moved to say hello, and then when she seemed hypnotized by the salamander on his arm and the phoenix disc on his chest, he spoke again. "Of course," he said. "You're a new neighbor, aren't you? And you must be," she raised her eyes from his professional symbols, "the fireman." Her voice trailed off. "How oddly you say that. I'd have known it with my eyes shut," she said slowly. "What, the smell of kerosene? My wife always complains," he laughed. "You never wash it off completely." "No, you don't," she said in awe. He felt she was walking in a circle about him, turning him end for end, shaking him quietly, and emptying his pockets, without once moving herself. "Kerosene," he said, because the silence had lengthened, "is nothing but perfume to me." "Does it seem like that, really?" "Of course, why not?" She gave herself time to think of it. "I don't know." She turned to face the sidewalk going towards their homes. "Do you mind if I walk back with you?" I'm Clarice McClellan. Clarice Guy Montague. Come along. What are you doing out so late wandering around? How old are you? They walked in the warm, cool, blowing night on the silvered pavement, and there was the faintest breath of fresh apricots and strawberries in the air, and he looked around and realized this was quite impossible so late in the year. There was only the girl walking with him now, her face bright as snow in the moonlight, and he knew she was working his questions around, seeking the best answer she could possibly give. Well, she said, I'm 17 and I'm crazy. My uncle says the two always go together. When people ask your age, he said, always say 17 and insane. Isn't this a nice time of night to walk? I like to smell things and look at things and sometimes stay up all night, walking and watch the sun rise. They walked on again in silence, and finally she said thoughtfully, You know, I'm not afraid of you at all. He was surprised. Why should you be? So many people are, afraid of the firemen, I mean. But you're just a man, after all. And then Clarice McClellan said, Do you mind if I ask, how long have you worked at being a fireman? Since I was 20, 10 years ago. Do you ever read any of the books you burn? He laughed. That's against the law. Oh, of course. It's fine work. Monday, burn Millay. Wednesday, Whitman. Friday, Faulkner. Burn 'em to ashes, then burn the ashes. That's our official slogan. They walked still further, and the girl said, Is it true that long ago firemen put fires out instead of going to start them? No, houses have always been fireproof. Take my word for it. Strange. I heard once that a long time ago houses used to burn by accident, and they needed firemen to stop the flames. He laughed. In the late afternoon it rained, and the entire world was dark gray. He stood in the hall of his house, putting on his badge, with the orange salamander burning across it. He stood looking up at the air-conditioning vent in the hall for a long time. His wife in the TV parlor paused long enough from reading her script to glance up. What's on this afternoon? He asked tiredly. She didn't look up from her script again. Well, this is a play comes on a wall-to-wall circuit in 10 minutes. They mailed me my part this morning. I sent it in some box tops. They write the script with one part missing. It's a new idea. The homemaker, that's me, is a missing part. When it comes time for the missing lines, they all look at me out of the 3 walls, and I say the lines. Here, for instance, the man says, What do you think of this whole idea, Helen? And he looks at me sitting here center stage, see? And I say, she paused and ran her fingers under a line in the script. I think that's fine. And then they go on with the play until he says, Do you agree to that, Helen? And I say, I sure do. Isn't that funny, Guy? He stood in the hall looking at her. It's sure fun, she said. What's the play about? I just told you. There are these people named Bob and Ruth and Helen. Oh. It's really fun. It'll be even more fun when we can afford to have the 4th wall installed. How long you figure before we save up and get the 4th wall torn out and the 4th wall TV put in? It's only $2,000. That's 1/3 of my yearly pay. It's only $2,000, she replied, and I should think you'd consider me sometimes. If we had a 4th wall, why'd it be just like this room wasn't ours at all, but all kinds of exotic people's rooms? We could do without a few things. We're already doing without a few things to pay for the 3rd wall. It was put in only 2 months ago, remember? Is that all it was? She sat looking at him for a long moment. Well, goodbye, dear. Goodbye, he said. He stopped and turned around. Does it have a happy ending? I haven't read that far. He walked over, read the last page, nodded, folded the script, and handed it back to her. He walked out of the house into the rain. The mechanical hound slept but did not sleep, lived but did not live in its gently humming, gently vibrating, softly illuminated kennel back in the dark corner of the firehouse. The dim light of 1 a.m, the moonlight from the open sky framed through the great window, touched here and there on the brass and the copper and the steel of the faintly trembling beast. Light flickered on its bits of ruby glass and on sensitive capillary hairs and the nylon-brushed nostrils of the creature that quivered gently, 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 its 8 legs spidering under it on rubber-padded paws. Montague slid down the brass pole. He went out to look at the city, and the clouds had cleared away completely, and he lit a cigarette and came back to bend down and look at the hound. It was like a great bee come home from some field where the honey is full of poison wildness, of insanity and nightmare, its body crammed with that over-rich nectar, and now it was sleeping the evil out of it. "Hello," whispered Montague, fascinated as always with the dead beast, the living beast. At night, when things got dull, which was every night, the men slid down the brass poles and set the ticking combinations of the olfactory system of the hound, and let loose rats in the firehouse areaway, and sometimes chickens, and sometimes cats, that would have to be drowned anyway, and there would be betting to see which the hound would seize first. The animals were turned loose. 3 seconds later, the game was done. The rat, cat, or chicken caught half across the areaway, gripped in gentling paws, while a 4-inch hollow steel needle plunged down from the proboscis of the hound to inject massive jolts of morphine or procaine. The pawn was then tossed in the incinerator. A new game began. Montague stayed upstairs most nights when this went on. There had been a time 2 years ago when he had bet with the best of them and lost a week's salary and faced Mildred's insane anger, which showed itself in veins and blotches. But now at night he lay in his bunk, face turned to the wall, listened to whoops of laughter below, and the piano-strung scurry of rat feet, the violent squeaking of mice, and the great shadowing, motioned silence of the hound, leaping out like a moth in the raw light, finding, holding its victims, inserting the needle, and going back to its kennel to die as if a switch had been turned. Montague touched the muzzle. The hound growled. Montague jumped back. The hound half rose in its kennel and looked at him with green-blue neon light flickering in its suddenly activated eyebulbs. It growled again, a strange rasping combination of electrical sizzle, a frying sound, a scraping of metal, a turning of cogs that seemed rusty and ancient with suspicion. "No, no, boy," said Montague, his heart pounding. He saw the silver needle extend upon the air an inch, pull back, extend, pull back. The growl simmered in the beast, and it looked at him. Montague backed up. The hound took a step from its kennel. Montague grabbed the brass pole with one hand. The pole, reacting, slid upward and took him through the ceiling quietly. He stepped off in the half-lit deck of the upper level. He was trembling, and his face was green-white. Below, the hound was sunk back upon its 8 incredible insect legs and was humming to itself again, its multifaceted eyes at peace. Montague stood, letting the fears pass, by the drop-hole. Behind him, 4 men at a card table under a green-lighted light in the corner glanced briefly but said nothing. Only the man with the captain's hat and the sign of the phoenix on his hat at last, curious, his playing cards in his thin hand, talked across the room. "Montague, it doesn't like me," said Montague. "What, the hound?" The captain studied his cards. "Come off it. It doesn't like or dislike. It just functions. It's like a lesson in ballistics. It has a trajectory we decide for it. It follows through. It targets itself, homes itself, and cuts off. It's only copper wire storage batteries and electricity." Montague swallowed. "Its calculators can be set to any combination, so many amino acids, so much sulfur, so much butterfat and alkaline, right? We all know that. All of those chemical balances and percentages on all of us here in the house are recorded in the master file downstairs. It would be easy for someone to set up a partial combination on the hound's memory, a touch of amino acids perhaps, that would account for what the animal just did now, reacted towards me." "How?" said the captain, irritated, but not completely angry. "Just enough memory set up in it by someone so it growled when I touched it." "Who would do a thing like that?" asked the captain. "You have any enemies here, Guy?" "None that I know of. We'll have the hound checked out by our technicians tomorrow." "This isn't the first time it's threatened me," said Montague. "Last month it happened twice. We'll fix it up, don't worry." But Montague did not move and only stood thinking of the ventilator grill in the hall at home and what lay behind the grill. If someone here in the firehouse knew about the ventilator, then mightn't they tell the hound? The captain came over to the drop-hole and gave Montague a questioning glance. "I was just figuring," said Montague. "What does the hound think about down there at night? Is it coming alive on us, really? It makes me cold." "It doesn't think anything we don't want it to think." "That's sad," said Montague quietly, "because all we put into it is hunting and finding the killing. What a shame if that's all it can ever know." Beatty snorted gently. Hell, it's a fine bit of craftsmanship, a good rifle that can fetch its own target and guarantees a bullseye every time. That's why, said Montague, I wouldn't want to be its next victim. Why, you got a guilty conscience about something? Montague glanced up